thing didn't turn off. So that was kind of crazy. All right, so let's rewind. Or maybe we won't rewind. What we're doing is finding ourselves in an election year. And in an election year, we're on the lookout. We're in a constant search for an ideal, something that we could rally around, a gathering point, a reason to be engaged. And that is truly the point of elections, is to gather engagement and to rally an army or rally a group, if you will. And we've seen groups being rallied. We've seen those kind of actions out in the world today. But if we're looking for an ideal, does that action that we're finding out there, is it applicable to you as an individual, as a family, potentially, and then as would it be applicable to your employer and your job purpose? How about your school district, your community at large? Then what about your state and ultimately the nation? Are those actions that people taking, would their desires, if laid across or applied to the whole of the United States, all 330 plus million of us, would they lead to a richer, a fuller life? Are their goals appropriate for us? So that's kind of where we are. Good to see everybody coming on there. Yay. Yes, Vicky, you got to have sound. And see, this is the first time I did not check that little button because I trusted it. Trust but verify. What was Ronald Reagan, wasn't it? Trust but verify. And it's just a little glance over there, so we'll do there. Good to see you there, Robert. It's been a bit of a spell. And so what I kind of want to do is roll out a little slideshow. And we'll show this over on here on StreamYard. And so I'm just going to call it Finding an Ideal. And there are so many out there. And this is the challenge with this, is that we have 300 plus million people. And then even if the nation as a whole found an ideal, would it be applicable or usable in the outside world? Because Americans, we have to interface with the rest of the world. So our ideals, ultimately, as you're an adult, and I'm sure most of us on here are, deal with a spouse. You know, we're out there looking, we're shopping, we're looking for the spouse that will complement us. And then obviously a job that can then bring a revenue, an income source, but then most importantly, fulfill us in a way that does then bring an income and that leads to harmony within yourself. And then if you're in a good shape, then you could be beneficial to family and spouse. And then that job or that spouse isn't a detriment to your health. If you're not getting the activity, if you're not getting out and about, if you're not eating correctly, all of these things will then play into health and then body as well. And then the proper home. And this could be even just the emotional home, the safe space you come home to, or physical structure itself and to where it's located. So we're seeing how shopping for the best applies to just about every single thing we do in our lives: spouse, job, health, body, home. And then you've got to nourish that body itself. You've got to have food. And that is a decision that we encounter nearly every hour of the day. Cooking dinner in the other room right now, and I haven't had anything but coffee and the stomach's growling. But is it the right food for me? Is it going to nourish my body? And then once we've got these basic things done, we're looking to entertain ourselves. We're looking for a streaming service. We're looking for a book to read. We're looking for engagement through social media. We're looking to occupy time with the best thing possible. So we look at a streaming service, and sometimes one isn't enough. So you've got to do 2 or 3 because you like that show over there. You know, it becomes like your food. It's a la carte. And then once we have enough, we go to charity. We look for those things, those shelters, those rescue services, the children in Yemen, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scout cookies. You know, charity comes in so many ways. And then we get into dicey things. We get into things that are somewhat more complicated because these things, let's say politics down in here, don't necessarily serve us. We serve them. So it becomes a little bit of a choice in how we begin to draw that or allow that or go root for a religion or for a politics, and then politics ultimately will lead to some kind of governance, and a governance then is this structure that you then have to negotiate day by day by day, whether it's by taxes, whether it's by privacy, whether it's by what business you can or cannot operate, and the rules and engagements that your even your local government will then impose upon your business, whether it's a micro manufacturing, whether it's a stay-at-home business, or whether you have to go to work to then go to work. And religion then becomes a far more subjective one, because how do you prove something? How do you prove a belief system? And this is where so much consternation happens in the world, is through beliefs. Not proof that something is real, but just a belief that it potentially may be. And many, many, many are willing to gamble their lives and their behaviors with their fellow human beings on this religious belief. And once all of these are dealt with, assimilated, indoctrinated, or given a, then we have a certain desire for a kind of leadership. That leadership can be an invisible leader of a religion. It can be an elected president, or it could just be the spokesman for a charity, or just the pleasure you receive from a streaming service. And then will the leadership, will the religion, will the government deal with the issues that you have in your life? Can they accomplish loneliness? Can they accomplish those things that in many ways we pop up here to your spouse to then give you? And then the outcomes, that's all kind of subjective in the end, Ron. And maybe these can't even be dealt with like religion and government until after we passed. So let's roll to ideal. Move over Zoom who. Good to see you guys in there having a little chat. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to get to until like yesterday afternoon. And I thought, okay, let's talk about ideals and see where that takes us. Because usually when you start something, you've got an ideal. Where it takes you, leads you, isn't always necessarily. So an ideal, by definition, and I had to screenshot this, a conception of something in its absolute perfection. One example being the ideal of a national unity. Number two, one that is regarded as a standard or model of perfection or excellence. That could be an education. That could be a spouse. That could be the emotional revelry you get from church. It could even simply be a book that is outstanding. Number three, an ultimate or worthy object of endeavor or a goal. And as an adjective, conforming to a standard of perfection or excellent, perfect or highly satisfactory, like an ideal work environment, and then existing only in the mind or it's imaginary. And that is probably the more realistic outlook, that we have these ideals that we set out for ourselves. But then once you get to the real world and you look at the pros and cons and pros and cons, then it becomes a juggling match, and we'll get into that. So let's take the girl in college or high school. I'm looking for a husband. And he lifts me up. He understands me like no other, supports my every dream, believes in me no matter what, accepts me flaws and all, nurtures my heart and soul, and darn near perfect. It could be husband. It could be government. Think about that. A government that would lift you up, that would understand you and your individuality, that would support your desire to excel, to understand that you and there are citizens that need to dream, have to dream. They don't do well in school, but they want to excel at some gift that they were given. And then that becomes, in a way, a national treasure, is a citizen's ability to excel at those God-given gifts, because then that would uplift all others. Believes in me no what? Doesn't need to tap my phone, doesn't need to follow me. What a concept. Accepts me, flaws and all, because, we all have them. And then a structure which would nourish heart and soul, and that would lead to something damn near perfect. So we have spiritual desires, needs, acceptances, emotional issues, loving, level-headed thought. And then there's the other physical likes, which have to do, because you've got your physical engagement. And then there's the mental aspect of an ideal partner. Baggage, everybody's got baggage. That just, they're intelligent, humorous, playful, understanding, loves my language, conventional or conversational presence and quality time, and then in a way independent. These are big, 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 big as we move on through. So scientific and educational, they kind of break down, and let's talk about ideal. I for identify the problem, D to define and represent the problem, E to explore possible strategies, A, act on the strategies, look back and evaluate the effects of your actions. Again, this can apply to government. We see problems, and in fact, this is really where government tends to get stuck. We identify the problems, we talk about the problems, and we glorify the victims of the problems. So define and represent the problem. And then E, how do we explore and develop strategies to solve problems? And this is the A part, the acting on the strategies, is largely where elections end and action by governments end, is the ability to act and develop strategies to problems. Because we really can't get out of, or at least recently we haven't been able to get out of, the possible strategy. How can we come together and solve an issue as a collective, as an entire group? And that can be a big challenge. So let's go back 2,000 plus years, or even a little less than that in the case of Machiavelli. So got Plato as they began to look at government. And this particular point of time, we had been dealing with Rome, and that was the big guys, and they had just toppled Egypt. And so democracy and republics, they were definitely things talked about, but monarchies were largely the rule of the day, and how the people dealt with governments and the king's taxation and the crown's land and so forth and so on. So to develop a public, so says Plato, a normative examination of governing citizens believed to be incapable of governing themselves. So a philosopher, one who could look at the issue and rationally, intellectually come to solutions, or a philosopher king should rule to create a just society. Aristotle, in this similar time frame, politics both normative, what should be, and a descriptive, or what we presently have. So based on observations of Greek city-states, to see what works and then what doesn't, because that's kind of the Greek cities, is we had multiple examples within a small geographic area, and you could see what works. And that, to me, is I think there'll be some processes that happen in the United States that become decentralized, as we see the federal government in some ways simply break or cease to exist, or the ability to exert its influence over larger areas wanes because of the problems we presently have. We see 51 states, if DC ends up getting statehood, as kind of before the Congress right now, approach the problems, be they healthcare, be they education. There's a list that could get kind of lengthy of problems that centralization has not been able to solve. And maybe that was the plan at all. That has to be surrendered. That maybe the plan isn't and wasn't to see a society thrive, but one to be captured, controlled, and directed. And if we were to look at the way governance in the United States is, and probably most of the world now, is to centralize it and then to control. And by doing that, we take the nurturing part out of it. We take the ability to creatively thrive out of it. So it begins to really change those kind of things. Important. The Prince, published in 1513, obtaining and using political power. And there's a realist explanations may not be explanations not based on religious doctrine or what we wish society to be. And this is what seems like has happened. We're using the political offices simply as power. So how do we break it up? Collectivism and individualism. The collectivism is where we've kind of been tended to be drifting. Those are the protests that are happening presently. The roots are in Plato and then Marx. The political system is largely expressed as socialism and communism. Revolution is the result, and totalitarian dictatorship in one form or another, whether it is a party like the CCP or the CCP, well, the Soviet system. That was CCPP. The totalitarian dictatorship. So you have this structure, and whether the people are qualified or not, if you have told the line, been honorable and loyal to the system, then you, I hate to say this, but you fail upwards. How many times, even in the States, do we see somebody just really, really mess up a job or booger up an investigation or oversee a disaster, and it's a spectacular failure, but yet in 1, 2, 3 years, they're promoted up the chain of command, and that just kind of lets you know that that outcome of that disaster was likely already set in stone. For individualism as a political system, the roots are in Socrates, Hume, Adam Smith, Declaration of Independence, which we read a couple of shows back, and then the political system right now is expressed in democracy. So that resulted, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights. We had these powers split up. So the local regions could still have establish their local governments, excuse me, establish and maintain their own school system. And now we have a Department of Education that oversees education. And indeed, if you don't show up at school by 6 years old, somebody knocks on your door. Regulate trade within the states. Okay. Conduct elections, still should be reserved to the states, and then provide for public safety, sheriffs largely, and then the state marshals. Where that and the national government overlap, taxation, providing for the public welfare, criminal justice. Dudes jump back and forth between jurisdictions. The ability to borrow money, which is essentially accessing the financial system through the charter banks, and then, of course, to build roads, which would then for allowing for trade. Ultimately, that would head to ports, so you're dealing with foreign trade. Copyright laws and patent laws. This is kind of an interesting topic because we've seen such changes within the patent laws in just the last 15 years. Some of them probably not beneficial for us, but the national government with the ability to declare war, create and maintain armed forces, and then to establish foreign policy. That's kind of the big one. So where are you? Are we on the political spectrum, and maybe where do we go? And as I look through these graphics today, I was curious to see how many put fascism on the left and others put it on the right. Communism always ended up on the left side of things, and then anarchy was kind of back and forth. It was definitely at the one extreme on the right. But it's interesting that there's no set place where this resides, which is corporatism that runs the government. And it's in a strange way that's kind of where we're seeing this, especially with the value of information and then the information society. We've seen that being really collected in the Facebooks and the Twitters, in those that are controlling or managing at best our public discourse. Yeah, Karen, excellent slide on federalism. A great summary. There's so many aspects to this, and I'd like to say that nothing is truly set in stone. And as soon as you end up set in stone, then we need a revolution to kind of break us out of it, so we can be flexible, because the generation that is in now, my generation and younger, is very different than the one 50 years ago, and certainly 50 years prior to that. We're just always different people rolling through these same systems. So fascism, a political system where the state comes before the individual, we're kind of there now, which is headed by a dictator bureaucracy or republic that is distinguished by career leaders, typically for life, where individuals are subject to arbitrary search and seizure under the pretense that it's good for the whole, which is always greater than the one. We can see that. It is widespread. Communism, a political and economic system in which the government controls all business. An idea starts. The idea goes up the chain of command. They realize that it could be of benefit for the people, so the party starts the business. In Russia, they started the aircraft manufacturing business. They ran the state space exploration business. It was all state-run. And that leads to massive inefficiencies, but not so great that it is an abandoned system. Communist governments, all communists are socialists, but not all socialists are communists. And this is the fine line where we see the protesters wanting to be. Where can we have, let's just finish this, where could we have access to a nation's natural wealth? Be it Libya and oil, be it Venezuela and their massive oil reserves. Those would be used those could be brought out of the ground, processed, sold to the world to the benefit of the people rather than to corporations. So there's some subtle areas where you can have the natural wealth of a geographic area serve the people rather than having companies, the Arcos, the Exxons, the Texacos, the Gulfs, the Phillips 66. Some are here, some are not here. Some have been emerged to get larger and larger corporations, which kind of leads us back to a sort of eco-fascism. So either way, the people are supporting the system. And it's always that way. Capitalism necessarily won't be killed by communism, but capitalism will be killed by low-wage workers by products. So you have I hate to say it, but the fascist part of the corporate aspects not trickling down, not allowing the workers to earn a living wage. And if you can't earn a living wage, then your creativity, you're willing to contribute to your companies, to your departments. You would either do it for kudos, which would then give you rewards above and beyond your other employees or your coworkers, which is fine. But you're not necessarily going to be allowed to go out and maybe start a new company off the new idea. And then when we have this people, when is enough? When is enough? And this was back in the Greek currency issue and the debt issue. So kind of where we've seen are the two sides, the right and left sides, really kind of blend together to where some Democrats, some stuff about abortion and pro-choice and acknowledging about climate change, but really doing nothing about it. My protest. And Republicans, some stuff about pro-life and guns, but then denying climate change. Part of that's real too. So, and both support Israel, do Wall Street's bidding, unlimited military spending, also China, full spectrum dominance, let money rule politics, neoliberalism rocks, spy on everyone, screw the old and poor, oligarchy, not democracy, vive U.S. Imperialism, outlaw third parties. This maybe is where the control is. So I want to say this, that today our leaders have been groomed to fill public roles of leadership, but not by the fires of life, but the rituals of a secret brotherhood. As we see children, as we see young adults from previous bloodlines, and friends, and then get put into positions of power as they mature of age. And this isn't just Europe. It happens here in the States as well. There's plenty of pictures of recent politicians, some and many in power, who have been part of a brotherhood and dealing with a secret group of leaders, a secret cabal, if you will, that have then raised to fill certain roles in leadership and governance. And that's our problem. So we're either dealing with socialists who want both economic and social equality and big government to enforce it, conservatives who want the government to protect the social traditions but then not to run the economy so the capitalists have free reign, liberals who would like to have economic equality but social freedom, or libertarians who want both social and economic freedom and a way small government because, we all like to pay taxes. So where are we today? Most of humanity started with a monarchy. The monarchy, the king, the queen, that was where it began. And so did we have government accountability with a monarch in control? You could listen to the oaths of office of Australia, New Zealand. Justin Trudeau was in Canada. And they're very interesting oaths. They're oaths to the crown, not to the people. It's a very different gist when you're taking control or just doing crown's bidding. So do you have individual freedom? And that probably is ultimately a zero, that the crown will dictate what happens. But what you want is a benevolent monarchy rather than totalitarian or an ugly man. Autocracy, that could be an ideal, and that leaves us somewhere closer to individual freedom. And democracy, if you can keep it, gives us the greatest individual freedom because we have elections to discuss those greater issues which we're dealing with at all times. This I found yesterday from an interesting document when investigating a little bit of the COVID thing. But what is often surprising about new technologies is collateral damage. The extent of the problem that you can create by solving another problem is always a bit of a surprise. This idea, I'm going to venture a guess, is what has kept us out of free energy, us from solving a lot of problems that are financially beneficial to the system as it is. Can you imagine if we had a cure for cancer? That you could go into an oncology clinic, a course of something that lasted maybe 14 days, and then be cancer-free for the rest of your life. How much money take out of the system? How many doctors that make $500,000 a year would end up out of business? How many treatments that cost your insurance companies $100,000, $150,000 a chemo that would just simply vanish? That was money that wouldn't be running through the system. So we can see how we've had these structures set up to keep us poor, to keep us paying the big bills, to keep us serfs inside of this system. So we really, really, really need to, what I'm excited about of somehow these unusual hidden technologies can get out, and then there's no other way that we can solve the system. All right, and probably the end of the system, says we're kind of coming up on that time, is our current political system ensures that not the worst, that ensures that, let's try this again, Scott. Our current political system ensures not that the worst will get on top, though they often do, but the best will never apply. Kind of the truth, because who wants to go and get and play in a swamp? We've seen how ugly it is and how many compromises one would have to make to even get considered to be a part of the system, to be a career employee, to compromise those ideals that we started off the show with. We begin our lives looking for the best, that which serves us. And we're left with, in the political realm, probably in the religious realm as well, those systems which then take advantage of us. And this is kind of the state of where the world is, and whether we can solve that with another election, or we're just kicking the can down the road for another opportunity, potentially in 4 years, to solve the problems that could have been solved 104 years ago. All right, that's kind of it for the week. I was going to get on into mask or not mask, but I think we'll be able to save part of that for Wednesday, and that's a request of Robin. So we'll get into this. This is kind of cool because there's a lot of interesting ways to look at this. And Robin, you're so right. The youth is full of idealism, and we do kind of lose it as we get older, and you have to even get through the education system. And I'm glad I wasn't homeschooled, although they could have done it. But I'm glad I wasn't homeschooled. I'm glad I got the opportunity to go to school for that social interaction. But once you hit college, you realize that the game is very, very different than what we were told and brought up as children. All right, thanks for your participation, guys. And we will see you on Wednesday for another edition of another perspective. And you kind of know what we're going to talk about. We'll hit this mask thing and see what else we need to pack in at the end to make it fit our time frame that we're looking to fill. I'll see you tonight at 5 o'clock Mountain. Look at weather. I know Risa had a question about the dust. Where did I have the answer for you coming up at 5 o'clock. All right, everybody, take care. Have a great evening, and we'll see you a little bit later.